Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So, just as a quick disclaimer, this is definitely going to be a long video, because I have quite a lot to talk about in this one. And it's quite late right now, it's the middle of the night, and I can't sleep. I've got kind of a messed up sleeping pattern at the moment, since I've been away over the weekend, and yeah, I haven't slept much, so my curiosity is kind of peaked at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I figured, you know what, might as well make a video, so let's go ahead and make it. I also wanted to point out that since I've been so inactive on this channel, I've noticed that one of the things that's become a bit of a trend with my recent videos, because I upload them so few and far between, I've noticed that I've kind of rambled a bit in my videos, and I tend to spend the early parts of the videos talking about things I've said in older videos and basically pointing people towards them and trying to basically reiterate a lot of the points that I've previously made in the past about these fighters who I'm talking about in the video. And like, for example, my last video where I was talking about Usyk and him being pound for pound #1, I spent a large percentage of that video talking about basically stuff I've said about Usyk in the past in the many videos that I've made about him, and I don't really want to do that here. Now, this video, as you can tell by the title, is about Josh Taylor. Now, again, I've made many videos in the past about Josh Taylor. He's a fighter whose career I've followed since pretty much the very beginning. And I think I was actually the first guy in the YTBC to ever make videos about Josh Taylor. You know, I actually predicted he would be world champion right near the beginning of his career. And yeah, I was kind of the first guy to talk about him. So I have a long history with Josh Taylor as a fighter. And if you guys want to know my opinions on him, I'm not going to reiterate it here. You know, just go and watch my old videos. And with the YTBC being what it is, and the general contingent of people that consume boxing content being the type of people that they are, they tend to project the way that they look at the sport onto you. And because I kind of, for lack of a better term, jumped on the Josh Taylor bandwagon very early on, I kind of developed a reputation of being a Josh Taylor fanboy. You know, that's kind of a reputation that I ended up with. Now, I don't think I've ever said anything about the man that I couldn't justify. I don't think I've ever said anything about the man that wasn't objectively true. And again, you can go and watch my old videos if you don't believe me, and look at all the predictions that I made for Josh Taylor fights. I mean, did I ever get a prediction for any of his fights wrong? I don't think I did. So, again, go and watch them if you don't believe me, but I digress. So yeah, I developed a reputation of being a Josh Taylor fanboy because I sort of jumped on his bandwagon early and, you know, had a lot of positive things to say about him. Now, I've also had a lot of critical things to say about him over the years, but people don't tend to think about that. They kind of just run with whatever narrative and, like I said, project the way that they look at the sport onto you, whereas it's a little bit unjustified, I would say, because I'd say that out of a lot of people in this community, I'm one of the most consistent, and I'm one of the few content creators on here who actually has a standard that they stick to. But that's neither here nor there. That's not what I want to talk about here. So, Josh Taylor this past weekend had a rematch with Jack Catterall, where he ended up losing the fight by a controversial unanimous decision. Now, I'll talk about how I scored the fight in a bit. That's not really what I want to focus on with this video. And I know this video's already like 3 minutes in and I'm already rambling and I'm already incoherent, but you know, it's late at night, so who cares? It is what it is. You know, if you made it this far, chances are you would want to hear what I have to say anyway. So basically, you guys will remember that in my second to last video, I was talking about Tyson Fury. And one of the things that I said in that video, which I think is very important here, I said that Tyson Fury right now, his stock is at an all-time low. And what I meant by that is his reputation right now and how he is viewed by the general boxing public and even hardcore fans to an extent, it's at the lowest it's ever been. Right now, he's considered a fraud in the sport of boxing. He's considered a fighter whose success was pretty much circumstantial. He's considered a guy who had the vast majority of his success due to size advantage, political advantage, and just being in the right place at the right time. And he's generally regarded as a fighter who was never as good as advertised and has been completely and utterly exposed. That's what I mean when I say that his stock is at an all-time low right now. So, one of the things that I neglected to mention in that video, but it was on my mind, and I do think that this is relevant, is the fact that with his stock being at an all-time low, that's actually potentially a good thing for Tyson Fury. And the reason I say that is because right now, at this point in time, there is absolutely no pressure on him whatsoever. Nobody, and I mean nobody, in the general boxing public or in the boxing media or anybody who follows boxing, nobody in that contingent expects anything from him now. He's not expected to beat Usyk in the rematch. He's not expected to beat Anthony Joshua. He's not expected to beat any top 10 heavyweight right now. He's considered, like I said, an absolute fraud, a guy who's been completely exposed, and a guy who isn't that good and was never that good to begin with. And that puts him in a very, very unique position. That puts him in a position where he can rebuild now. Like if Tyson Fury has a few good fights left in him, if he has the motivation and the drive to rededicate himself, retool his game, and commit to improving as a fighter and redeeming his legacy, he has a perfect opportunity to do that, because those of us who have followed his career from the beginning and who know how talented he is, we know that he's capable of it. When Tyson Fury really puts his mind to it and dedicates himself and trains properly and takes the technical side of the sport seriously, he's one of the best heavyweights in the world. And if he goes in there in the rematch against Usyk, and if he does a number on Usyk, if he surprises the entire boxing world, that's going to be one of the most incredible, historic comebacks in boxing history. If he goes in there and beats Anthony Joshua now, with how high Anthony Joshua's stock is right now, that's going to be incredible. And it's going to really put the icing on the cake of what is a fascinating career for Tyson Fury. And it's really going to make him a legend in the sport of boxing. And it's going to be kind of I guess you could say, a bittersweet way to end his career, because obviously if he were undefeated and, if he became undisputed, that would have been like the cherry on top for his career. It would have been just the absolute pinnacle of his success, and it would have made him a certified all-time great in boxing. But if he makes a dramatic comeback, and if he beats Usyk, or if he beats Anthony Joshua, or if he becomes heavyweight champion again, like at any level, that's still going to be an incredible comeback, and it's going to be, it's going to be kind of a storybook ending to his career. Now, what does any of this have to do with Josh Taylor? Well, Josh Taylor right now, and this didn't really occur to me until earlier this evening, I didn't really think about it until then, but Josh Taylor right now is in a very, very similar position to what Tyson Fury is. He's in a position where his stock is well and truly at an all-time low, because just like with Tyson Fury, the narrative on Josh Taylor right now, or what appears to be the currently accepted narrative, is that he's not a good fighter, that he was never a good fighter to begin with, and the vast majority of the success he had in his career was, again, just like Tyson Fury, was due to a size advantage, due to circumstantial situations, him being in the right place at the right time, some sort of political advantage. He's a guy who right now is viewed as a fraud and a guy who's been completely exposed as never having been that good. And if you were to ask the general casual boxing audience what they think about Josh Taylor right now, they'll say he's got no chance at welterweight. He's got no chance of ever becoming champion again. He's basically a guy who's done, a guy who's been found out now, and a guy who's essentially going nowhere and who's at the end of the road. Well, I say that to say this. Now, when I first watched the Jack Catterall fight, I'm talking about the rematch, I thought the same as a lot of people. I thought, look, Josh Taylor doesn't have it anymore. He can't really pull the trigger anymore. He's too one-dimensional at this stage of his career. He's too stationary. And, he's a little bit too predictable. And with him having regressed, and there's no doubt in my mind he has regressed as a fighter physically, and with him kind of stagnating in his development, because what I think happened with Josh Taylor, now, if you look at his early fights, one of the things that made Josh Taylor so successful, and it wasn't just all about size, and I'll get into that later, what made him so successful was that he had certain abilities, certain skills that you can't teach in boxing. He was the kind of fighter who could cut off the ring, who could bend at the waist, bend at the knees, bend at the hips, and he could get underneath punches, and he was able to shorten his own punches inside, again, similarly to Tyson Fury in the early part of his career, but on an even higher level, I would say, with Josh Taylor. And he was able to crowd these guys, and he was able to throw short, sharp, crisp, accurate body punches, and he was able to systematically deconstruct these guys in the ring. If you look at when he fought some of the early fights he had in his career, where he fought the likes of Dave Ryan, guys like O'Hara Davis, domestic opposition, he was leagues, and I mean leagues above these guys. He was able to break these guys down. He was able to systematically deconstruct them from the inside and take them out in style. And, he was a guy who would often throw punches with his opponents. And this is where kind of the physicality comes into it. Because of Josh Taylor's strength and conditioning, because of his fitness, and because of partially his size, he was able to exchange punches with fighters at 140, who were on his level domestically. And he was able to completely take them out from the outside by punching with them. And there was a certain amount of spite in the way he would fight. He was hyper aggressive. He would throw a lot of punches, but every single punch he threw was thrown with venom. It was thrown with intent. He had no interest whatsoever in ever going the distance with these guys. And that was something that was very impressive about him. And it was the kind of mentality that he took into his world level career. So he won the world title against Baranchik. Now, I've watched that fight many times. And what was interesting about that fight to me, now, people say that Taylor had a size advantage in that fight. Now, he was taller than Baranchik. He definitely had the height and reach on him. But I wouldn't necessarily say he was significantly bigger. I mean, Baranchik was a guy who was very, very stocky, very, very well built, kind of had that little Mike Tyson physique. And, he was a guy who himself was relatively big for the weight. He was a big puncher, had great stamina. He was a guy who would really, really bring the pressure and work your body and really put it on you. And I thought that what Josh Taylor showed in that fight was he showed a fantastic ability to adjust, because he had a lot of problems in the first few rounds of that fight. And that's because Baranchik, came into the ring with a lot more experience. And, he was the champion going in. He was the guy who was slightly more proven at a higher level. And, he went in there and really put it on Taylor. He hit Taylor so hard to the body in the first few rounds of that fight that Taylor was apparently pissing blood afterwards. But Taylor was able to hang in there. He was able to make a few adjustments. And you'll notice that he was able to stand in the pocket. And this is why I say that size didn't really come into it, because he didn't really use his height and reach. He was able to stand in the pocket with Baranchik, and he was able to counterpunch. So he was able to catch Baranchik in between his own somewhat wild combinations, and he was able to drop him. He dropped him with a beautifully well-placed right hook, and then a left hand. And, could have forced a stoppage in my opinion, but he kind of eased up on him after that and won the fight clearly and comfortably on points. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that he won the fight. You know, if you look at when he fought Victor Postal, for example, another guy who was, I would say, even bigger than Taylor. So again, size didn't really come into it. When he fought Victor Postal went into that fight with bags of experience. You know, he was so much more seasoned, former world champion. You know, a guy who had fought at a much higher level, both amateur and professional. And Taylor had some problems in that fight. You know, Postal was able to catch him with the jab from long range. He was able to catch him to the body, and he was able to kind of mess him about a bit with illegal tactics, you know, clinching, leaning, stuff like that. You know, Postal was just a veteran fighter and a guy who was still in very good shape and still had a lot to bring to the table. And what impressed me about that fight was that Taylor, once again, he was able to adjust. He was able to get inside. He was able to pivot. He was able to find a way past the jab, find a way past the scooping uppercut right hand that Postal was throwing. And Taylor was able to crowd Postal on the inside, and he was able to back him up skillfully, and he was able to outwork and outbox him from the inside. And Taylor completely took over that fight. And by the second half, he was firmly in control. And again, he scored a knockdown. He hurt Postal badly, had Postal running, had him under serious pressure, under more pressure than he'd ever been at that stage of his career. You know, because at that stage of his career, Postal only had one loss, which was to Terence Crawford in a pretty lackluster fight where, you know, he kind of got mauled and spoiled to death in the fight. And when he fought Josh Taylor, he was actually badly hurt. And I was impressed by the way that Josh Taylor was able to adjust in that fight and how he was able to figure out Postal. Like I said, he did it with pressure, and he did it with being systematic on the inside. And he won the fight clearly and convincingly. And of course, he also had that victory over Miguel Vasquez, another former world champion. And it was a similar situation. You know, Vasquez was a guy who'd never been stopped before, never really been convincingly beaten before. You know, most of his losses were flat out robberies. And, you know, he had some success from the outside, just boxing and using his long reach. But Taylor, again, because Taylor's more of a, he's not really much of a back foot boxer. He's a guy who had become more of a pressure fighter from the amateurs, you know. You know, because he was a guy who used to box behind a jab in his amateur days. And you'll see from, like, his early fights of his pro career, Taylor actually dropped some of his opponents with the jab because he used to throw a very, very stiff, very, very hard, accurate jab from long range. But it's something he kind of abandoned in his career, and he doesn't really use the jab much these days. But yeah, that's just kind of how his style changed over the years. He kind of relied more on his physicality inside, and again, being able to bend at the waist, bend his legs, get underneath his opponent's punches and throw with his opponent, and throw punches from the hip, basically, you know, because you punch harder as you punch up, more so than you punch down. And I just felt that the way that he took out Miguel Vasquez, you know, knocking him out with a clean right hook to the body after systematically breaking him down, despite the golfing experience, it showed that Taylor wasn't just a brute. You know, he didn't just rely on his physical strength and size. He actually did have technical boxing skills. And again, it's just something that over the years he tended to forget about. Like, if you look at the Regis Prograis fight, wasn't his best performance. In that fight, to me, Taylor kind of abandoned a lot of his tenacity on the inside, you know, his slipping under shots and counter-punching, throwing with his opponents. And he kind of, I think in that fight, he kind of fell in love with his chin a little bit. He kind of fell in love with his strength and his size. And he kind of just outlasted Regis Prograis. And I think he showed a few bad habits in that fight, which kind of plagued him from his career from that point on. Now, he did a little bit better when he fought Ramirez, and I think that's because Ramirez is a much more sophisticated pressure fighter than someone like Prograis, who's a bit more unorthodox and a bit more awkward and more of a slick counter-puncher. Ramirez is a guy he's kind of like your classic come forward pressure fighter. High guard, bobs and weaves, looks to break you down with hooks to the body. And I noticed that Taylor in that fight, he didn't really utilize his inside fighting ability much. He actually became more of a counterpuncher. And this is where I talk about Taylor's versatility and some of the things that he brings to the table. Because when he fought Ramirez, what he did in that fight was he'd kind of feint with the jab. He had some lead hand control, and he was kind of able to draw a lead from Ramirez and counterpunch him all night. And I actually watched that fight again not too long ago. Wasn't even competitive. I gave Taylor 10 rounds in that fight. I only gave Ramirez 2, and those were basically rounds that Taylor took off, where he was basically taking a breather because his trainer Ben Davison basically told him to. But I'm in agreement with a lot of people that Taylor had a perfect opportunity to score a knockout that night, because you look at where he scored the first knockdown. What he did was he kind of came right out at the start of the round, because it was right at the beginning of one of the rounds. He came out and drew a lead from Ramirez because he knew that Ramirez would start the round fast, because Ramirez had a good round previously. And Ramirez came out, kind of getting ready to throw a right hand. And what Taylor did was he threw a pull counter, so he pulled back and he walked Ramirez onto a beautiful left hand. It was such a well-placed, accurate left hand, and it dropped him. And then the second knockdown was he was standing in the pocket with him. And I know that there was a bit of controversy there because the referee kind of tapped Ramirez to tell the guys to break, and then Taylor just threw an uppercut. I don't think it was intentional. I don't think Taylor was in a position to know what the referee was doing, but Taylor threw a peach of an uppercut, which is his best punch, his left uppercut, and it dropped Ramirez. And yeah, just to me in that fight, he showed a lot of versatility because he was very, very different in that fight to what he'd been in his prior fights, like the Baranchik fight and the and the Prograis fight. He became more of a back foot counterpuncher against Ramirez, and he was able to control the pressure fighter all night and win the fight very, very clearly. Now, the problem is with and again, I know I said I wouldn't ramble too much, but I want to cover this quickly. It seemed to me, it didn't seem like this at the time. I had my concerns at the time, but it seems to me that what happened in that Ramirez fight is Taylor kind of peaked. He became undisputed that night. He made history. He became the first British fighter to become undisputed in the four-belt era. And he did it in record numbers. Like, he was able to become undisputed in just 18 fights, which is something that was unheard of in boxing at the time. And to say that he did it in such a short space of time, with such little experience, was really astonishing. And I think what happened in the aftermath of that fight is he kind of stagnated. And what I mean by that is, if you look at what happened to Josh in the aftermath of the Ramirez fight, he blew up in weight and became very, very complacent. His head got too big for its boots. He kind of thought he was, a top pound-for-pound fighter at that point. And it was like he just stopped developing, if you know what I mean. Like, he just gave up on trying to become the best fighter he could be. And it was like he'd achieved everything. He became undisputed. He went further and further than he ever thought he would at that stage of his career. And he just stagnated. And you could see that in the build-up to the Jack Catterall fight. The first fight, wasn't taking it seriously. Like I said, he'd blown up in weight. He'd completely and utterly stagnated in terms of his development. He wasn't taking the sport seriously anymore. And when he went into that fight, he was drained to within an inch of his life. He looked really, really bad on the scales. Looked really, really poor. And just looked to me like he was extremely gone and had nothing left. So that happened. You guys all know what happened in the fight. He looked very, very poor. Now, I've spoken at length in the past about how I saw the fight and who I thought won. I'm not going to rehash that here. But essentially, it was just all downhill from that point. He had another year out of the ring, came back, fought Teofimo Lopez, basically did nothing for 12 rounds. This guy and Josh Taylor, who is a high volume, aggressive, spiteful pressure fighter, and a guy who will stand in the pocket and duke it out with you for 12 rounds and put it all on the line. He goes in there against Teofimo Lopez, a smaller guy, smaller puncher, a guy who himself is a pretty inconsistent and pretty limited fighter, and he just doesn't pull the trigger, he doesn't execute, he doesn't perform. He shows in the early part of the fight that he could win the fight and could win it convincingly, but for whatever reason, and you guys can be the judge of that, for whatever reason he just doesn't execute and doesn't let his hands go and loses the fight on points. So I say all that to say this. Now, he's lost to Jack Catterall in the rematch. Now, how did I see the fight? Now, the narrative on the fight is that it was very, very close, that it could have gone either way, that the scorecards were extremely harsh because it was something like a 5-card margin on 2 of the cards and like a 3-card margin on one of the others. And that's kind of the narrative on it, right, is that there were basically predetermined scorecards that the British Boxing Board and the British boxing establishment in general kind of wanted Jack Catterall to win, and they kind of saw it as justice for what happened in the first fight. And I think that's a pretty rational way of looking at it, because it was very, very clear from the way that the fight was marketed and all through the build-up that Jack Catterall was the favoured guy, because when you get what's seen as a travesty in boxing, what's seen as an injustice, the casual sort of normie boxing fans who don't really know what they're looking at but kind of follow the pantomime of the whole thing, to these people, Josh Taylor was portrayed as the villain. He was the bad guy. He was the guy who got the hometown decision and who deserved to lose, essentially. So, going into the fight, Josh Taylor only has himself to blame. He should have known going into this fight, he should have understood that just winning the fight or just doing enough to win the fight wasn't enough. He had to make a statement. He had to go in there and he had to put a beating on Jack Catterall, and he had to stop him. He had to force a stoppage. And, he had to not only win the fight, but win the fight convincingly and conclusively. And whether or not you think he did enough to win, and an argument could be made that he didn't do that, did he? He didn't go in there and do a number on Catterall. There was too many defensive lapses from him. How I personally saw the fight was, and this might surprise a few people, but I actually don't think that Josh Taylor looked as bad as a lot of people are saying he did. Now, he definitely has regressed. The weight cut, what I will say, has definitely affected him. He definitely doesn't have the tenacity, the strength, or the power, or the stamina, or just the overall aggression that he had earlier in his career when he could make the weight comfortably. He's 33 years old now, and he's a guy who walks around well over 180, 190 pounds, and there's no way he can make 140 comfortably, It's always going to be a problem for him, and he definitely looked physically declined, and he wasn't doing the things that he would often do in the early part of his career. Like, he wasn't standing in the pocket, pivoting, bending at the waist, and throwing vicious hooks to the body and coming up top with uppercuts. He wasn't doing that, was he? He wasn't slipping under his opponent's shots and throwing with them. Like, when Jack Catterall would have his bursts of success, when he would throw punches, when he would throw those, like, triple jabs, and when he would throw that straight left or that overhand left, and he would kind of double up on it, Taylor wasn't throwing punches with him. What Taylor was doing is he was just kind of fighting like Joshua Clottey or Arthur Abraham, right? He was kind of hiding behind the high guard, blocking the punches, and then waiting for himself to become energized enough to strike, which is not something he would typically do earlier in his career. But what I did notice about Josh Taylor, and I talked about this on Del Boy's live stream, and I think some people understood what I was saying and didn't kind of act as if I was exaggerating. But what I was talking about was Josh Taylor's footwork in the fight actually really surprised me. And what I mean by that is, Jack Catterall is the type of fighter who, say what you want about him, he's obviously a very, very flawed fighter in his own right, but he's a guy who has very, very fluid movement. I'm talking about his foot movement. He's very, very difficult to read. He's very, very difficult to trap. He's a fighter who's very, very good at spoiling and taking the fight out of the fight with excessive movement and excessive clinching and stuff like that, and just spoiling tactics. And that was something that got him through the first fight. Like, in the first fight, Jack Catterall would have moments of success, and then during the moments in the fight where he wasn't throwing punches, he would try and completely spoil the fight by jumping on Taylor's back, putting him in a headlock, or just flat out running away, leaning on the ropes, slipping and sliding, doing shoulder rolls, hitting low and then using his head, and just doing everything he can to kind of slow down the pace of the fight and take the fight out of the fight, like I was saying. But in this fight, actually really surprised me that Catterall wasn't able to do that. And it's something a lot of people don't seem to have picked up on, and they don't seem to have noticed, and that is Josh Taylor's footwork. Guys, Josh Taylor has, and I've seen people say that he doesn't have any footwork, that he's a guy who can be easily outmaneuvered and outboxed. That's actually not true at all, and I'm not sure where people are getting that, because if you look at the fight, Taylor was cutting off the ring easily on Catterall. Unlike the first fight where Taylor was kind of chasing Catterall and like ragdolling him around the ring, in this fight, Taylor didn't really use much physicality at all. And the reason for that, like I said, is because he's so declined at this point, like he's so weight drained that he just doesn't have the strength anymore, or the stamina, or the energy, or the tenacity, or the aggression to really go in there and be the bigger man. But what Josh Taylor did instead was he used excellent, and I mean excellent, foot positioning to cut off the ring on Jack Catterall. And as a result of that, Jack Catterall spent the vast majority of this fight, I'm talking probably about 90% of the fight, and if you don't believe me, go and watch it. He spent about 90% of the fight either on the ropes or in the corner. Now, Jack Catterall doesn't like going on the ropes. Right? He likes to keep it in the center of the ring where he can jump on your back and clinch and then run away and circle you and throw kind of his speculative right jab and occasionally jump in with his left hand, and then if it misses, just grab you and pull you down. You know the script. But basically, in that fight against Josh Taylor, the rematch, that was the first fight I've ever seen of Jack Catterall where he wasn't able to do that. He was backed up to the ropes constantly. And whenever Josh Taylor decided to pounce on him and throw a punch, like even if Taylor just threw a jab or he just threw one left hand to the body or something, Catterall looked gassed to me. And he wasn't gassed necessarily from the work that he was doing or from any of the punches that Josh Taylor was landing. No, to me, Catterall was gassed because he was under so much mental pressure in the ring, because Josh Taylor was constantly cutting off his escape. Like when Catterall tried to escape or would try to keep it in the center of the ring, Taylor's footwork was just too much for him. He was getting control of the ring generalship. He was taking over the ring generalship, and he had Catterall completely and utterly gassed. He had Catterall clueless, and he had Catterall trapped. And there was several moments in the fight where I thought to myself, I was actually quite frustrated watching it, because I was like, why doesn't Taylor, while Catterall's on the ropes, clearly trying to catch his breath, right, trying to get a second wind, why doesn't Taylor just hold a high guard and charge at him? That's something Taylor used to do, is he used to charge at his opponents, and like I said, bend his knees, bend at the waist, and get inside and rip vicious body punches and come up top with hooks and uppercuts. And like I said, he would throw punches with his opponents, and with him being the bigger puncher, and there's no doubt he's the bigger puncher than Catterall, he would have been a lot more successful in those exchanges. But he wasn't doing it. But he was doing the first part of the equation. Like I said, he was cutting off the ring with his footwork, and he was trapping Catterall on the ropes. Catterall had no idea what to do, no idea where to go. And Taylor just wasn't executing. That was what I was talking about on Del Boys Live. He couldn't execute. And I think the weight cut has a lot to do with that. I think draining himself down to 140 and all the stress he's put his body through over the years, not only trying to make weight, but stuff he's gotten up to away from the ring, you guys know the deal. I think it's taken its toll on Taylor's body, and he can't physically execute the strategies that he could earlier in his career. But there were a few positive signs, and with Taylor's stock being at an all-time low right now, with him being generally considered a fraud, just like Tyson Fury, with him being generally considered a fraud and being a guy who was only successful in his career because of his size and strength, and he had no boxing skills and no abilities as a fighter, and basically now that those physical abilities have declined, he's going to get wrecked whoever he fights, basically. Like, nobody's expecting anything from him now. And I have to concede that it's very, very possible, knowing the kind of personality that Josh Taylor is, and, the kind of lack of professionalism he showed over the past few years, it's very possible that he could just retire now. And it's very, very possible that he could just decide, you know what, I'm just going to cash out now. I'm going to take a big money fight. I'm not going to train properly, and I'm just going to lay down, or I'm just going to give it a go, and whatever happens, happens. It's very, very possible that that could happen. But for some reason, and call me, I guess you could say, call me delusional. It is what it is. I don't really care what people think of me, but, there's something about Josh Taylor that I'm actually quite optimistic about. Now, if he moves up to welterweight, let's say, for talking's sake, he stops draining himself like an idiot to stay at 140. Why he's been doing that, you guys are going to have to explain it to me. I don't understand it, but he said after the first Catterall fight that was probably going to be his last fight at 140. And he decided to continue fighting there for whatever reason, but I digress. Let's say, for talking's sake, Josh Taylor decides, you know what, I'm going to move up to welterweight. I'm going to get myself an opponent who is kind of a fringe contender at welterweight, and I'm going to test the waters, and I'm going to see what I can do. And let's say he rededicates himself, retools his game, and decides to give it a go at welterweight. Right, let's say he decides, you know what, I'm going to fight at a division that suits me physically, where I'm not going to have to drain myself to make weight, and I'm going to rededicate myself to the gym, rededicate because he's made plenty of money now. Taylor can easily retire and live the rest of his life comfortably, right? And I would be totally happy for him if he did that, right? Because he's achieved, like I said, everything he wants to achieve in boxing, and he's well within his rights to do that. But if he decides, I'm going to give it a go at welterweight, I'm going to dedicate myself, I'm going to dedicate myself to my craft, I'm going to work on the things that I was able to do positively in the Catterall fight. I'm talking about his excellent footwork, his mental pressure, and the fact that he was able to basically control the pace of the fight for most of it anyway, and he was able to shut the opponent down, and he just wasn't able to really pull the trigger based on the weight cut. I've got a feeling, and I could be completely delusional here, and you can tell me if I am, I've got a feeling that Josh Taylor is going to surprise a lot of people at welterweight. And call me crazy. Look, you can, again, I'm known for being crazy anyway. At my stock right now on this channel, as if I care, is at an all-time low. If Josh Taylor is to fight Terence Crawford at welterweight, let's just say, for talking's sake, right, hypothetically, if that fight gets made, right, if he fights Terence Crawford at welterweight, and if Josh Taylor takes that fight seriously, right, he comes in shape, has a proper training camp, he's rehydrated, there's no, dehydration clause or loaded gloves or any of that nonsense. Let's say it's a real fight, it's on the level, and Josh Taylor decides to take it seriously and see it as a career-defining fight. I'm telling you guys right now, you guys are going to be shocked by how that fight goes. Like, I've been saying it for a long time. I've said it many times in the past. Josh Taylor at his best, Josh Taylor healthy, and Josh Taylor with the right mindset and the right preparation, he's all wrong for someone like Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford has never fought anybody like him. He's never fought anybody who's not only bigger than him, because Taylor's a little bit bigger than Crawford, naturally. Not only bigger than him, but a guy who can do things that you don't generally see in boxing. You know, a guy who can fight on the inside with the kind of tenacity and the kind of precision that's very, very difficult to teach a fighter. Terence Crawford's never dealt with that before. You know, he's never dealt with somebody who's going to stand in the pocket with him and really duke it out with him, work him to the body. You know, a guy who's going to use his size, use his strength, but also have the kind of footwork and the kind of understanding of inside fighting to make it a nightmare for him inside. I'm telling you guys right now, again, look, Taylor's stock is at an all-time low. He's considered an absolute fraud. He goes into that fight, he's going to be one of the biggest underdogs that we've seen in recent years in big consequential fights. I'm talking about, right? He's going to be a massive underdog. Nobody's going to give him a chance. You know, he's going to be seen as complete and utter food. It's going to be seen as a mismatch. He's going to be seen as a walkover opponent. And I'm telling you guys right now, if that fight's on the level and if he takes it seriously, it's going to be a shocking result for boxing. And I'm telling you right now, Taylor has something left. Like, if he's able to get the weight situation under control, and if he's able to fight at welterweight or 154, I'd say welterweight would probably suit him better. And if he's able to get himself healthy nutritionally, right? If he's able to stay off the drugs, stay off the booze, and retool his game and rededicate himself to the technical side of boxing, he's going to surprise a lot of people. I'm telling you right now, he is. So, yeah, this has been a long-ass video. I'm actually very, very tired now. But I'm glad I made this, because I wanted to get it out there, because, you know, it gives some content for the channel, doesn't it? It gives you guys something to... It gives you guys some background noise, I guess. That's kind of all my videos are now, background noise. Because nobody really cares about what it is I have to say. They just kind of... You know, a lot of people like to hear what I have... You know, they like to hear my voice for whatever reason, and they want to hear me ramble and rant, I guess. So, yeah, here's what it is. There's a video for you guys. There's a bit of optimism. But yeah, man, I'm actually weirdly encouraged by what I saw from Josh Taylor. And I think he's got another great performance left in him. If he wants to. If he wants that performance. If he is dedicated enough to go out there and work for it. I think he's got another great performance left in him. So let me know what you... And the same goes for Tyson Fury, by the way. I feel the same about him. So maybe I'll talk about that in a live stream. Maybe this weekend. We'll see. Thanks for watching, guys, and God bless.